You know, when you read through the Old Testament, you come across some really fascinating and frankly pretty shocking stuff. It's not all just Psalms and Proverbs. There are these repeated intense warnings against something called a shrine prostitute or a cult prostitute. And you might be thinking, what on earth is that? It's a concept that's totally alien to us today, but it was a massive deal back then. A major point of conflict between the Israelites and their neighbors. So let's unpack this. What were shrine prostitutes and why was the Bible so vehemently against them? First, let's get the terminology right because the original language tells us a lot. In Hebrew, the word for a female shrine prostitute was kadesha, and the word for a male one was kadesh. These words come from a root that means holy or set apart. Now that's a huge clue right there. This wasn't just everyday street prostitution. These individuals were considered set apart for a specific religious purpose. They were part of a temple or a shrine staff. When the Old Testament was translated into Greek, they sometimes used the word hierodolos, which literally means temple slave, again reinforcing this idea that they were dedicated to a deity. So what was their role? What did a Kadesh or Kadesha actually do? Well, they were central figures in the fertility cults of the ancient Near East, especially those of the Canaanites, who worshipped gods like Baal and goddesses like Asherah. In these religions, the natural world, the rain, the sun, the fertility of the soil, the health of the livestock, the birth of children, was all controlled by the gods. And these gods and goddesses were often depicted as having their own sexual relationships. The core belief was a kind of sympathetic magic. The idea was that by performing sexual rituals on Earth, right there at the local shrine, humans could stimulate the gods to do the same in the divine realm. So a worshiper would go to a shrine, perhaps to pray for a good harvest or for their wife to conceive a child. Part of that worship could involve a ritual sexual act with a Kadesh or Kadesha. This act wasn't seen as just a personal, sensual thing. It was a sacred duty, a form of prayer enacted with the body. They believed it would mystically encourage Baal to impregnate the land with rain, or Asherah to grant fertility to their family. It was a transaction with the divine, aimed at securing prosperity, rain, and children. Both men and women served in these roles. The Bible mentions the Kadesh, the male prostitutes, several times. For example, 2 Kings 23:7 talks about the quarters of the male cult prostitutes that were actually in the house of the Lord, the Jerusalem temple itself, during a period of apostasy. This shows just how deeply these pagan practices could infiltrate Israelite society, even reaching into its most sacred space. And this brings us to the core of the issue. The biblical condemnation. The God of Israel, Yahweh, is presented as being completely different from the gods of the Canaanites. His holiness was about moral and ethical purity, not ritual sex. The relationship he wanted with his people was one of covenant, faithfulness, and justice, like a marriage. So when the Israelites started participating in these cults, it was seen as a profound betrayal on multiple levels. It wasn't just breaking a rule, it was spiritual adultery. It was turning their back on their unique God to chase after the gods of their neighbors. Deuteronomy 23:17 is incredibly direct. No Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. It was an absolute prohibition. The wages earned by any kind of prostitute were considered an abomination and couldn't be brought into the temple as an offering. This is why you see so many stories of righteous kings in the Old Testament, like Asa, Jehoshaphat, and especially Josiah, making a huge effort to expel or drive out the shrine prostitutes from the land. In 1 Kings 15, it says King Asa put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land. Later, King Josiah, in his great religious reform, not only removed them but tore down their living quarters right next to the temple. This wasn't just a social cleanup. It was a radical act of religious purification, a desperate attempt to bring the nation back to its covenant with God. So the shrine prostitute wasn't just a salacious detail. It represented a fundamental clash of worldviews, a religion based on transactional magical sex rituals versus a religion based on covenant faithfulness, holiness, and morality. It was a battle for the very soul of ancient Israel, and understanding that helps us see just how radical and countercultural the message of the Bible really was in its time.